The Battle of El Alamein stands as one of the most significant clashes of World War II. Fought in the arid deserts of Egypt between October and November 1942, it marked the point where the tide of war in North Africa decisively shifted in favor of the Allies. Until that moment, Axis forces, under the brilliant but overextended German commander, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, had pushed deep into North Africa, threatening Egypt and the vital Suez Canal. The Allies, battered by previous defeats, were desperate for a breakthrough that would halt Rommel's advance and restore confidence among their ranks and populations back home. To understand why El Alamein was so important, one must first consider the wider North African campaign. Since 1940, the deserts of Libya and Egypt had been a seesaw battlefield between Britain and Italy, later reinforced by Germany's feared Afrika Korps under Rommel. For the Axis, control of North Africa promised access to the Middle East's oil reserves and a direct threat to Britain's imperial lifeline through the Suez Canal. For the Allies, holding North Africa was essential to safeguard shipping routes and eventually mount an invasion of southern Europe. By mid-1942, Rommel had gained the upper hand. After a series of victories, including the capture of Tobruk in June, his forces advanced eastward across Libya and into Egypt. The British Eighth Army, though reinforced with troops from across the Commonwealth, struggled to stop him. Morale was shaken, and Britain feared that Cairo, and perhaps the canal itself, might soon fall into Axis hands. The stage was set for a desperate stand. The British, under General Claude Auchinleck, withdrew and established defensive positions near the small railway halt of El Alamein, located about 60 miles west of Alexandria. The choice of ground was crucial. The Mediterranean Sea to the north and the impassable Qattara Depression to the south created a natural bottleneck. Rommel could not easily outflank the Allied line. He would have to break through head-on. It was here, along a narrow strip of desert, that the fate of North Africa would be decided. The first clash at El Alamein took place in July 1942 when Rommel attempted to push through the Allied defenses after his rapid advance from Tobruk. At that time, British forces were still under the command of General Claude Auchinleck, who personally took charge of the Eighth Army. Rommel's attack initially made progress, but the geography of El Alamein worked in the Allies' favor. With the sea to the north and the Qattara Depression to the south, his Afrika Korps and Italian divisions had little room to maneuver. The fighting turned into a grinding battle of attrition. Auchinleck managed to hold the line. Though the Axis advance was halted, the British could not counterattack effectively. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and by the end of July, Rommel's offensive had stalled. Still, the Allies remained cautious. Supplies were stretched thin, and Rommel was still seen as a formidable commander whose tactical brilliance had repeatedly outfoxed his opponents. Back in London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill grew impatient. He wanted a decisive victory to rally British morale and to reassure allies such as the United States and the Soviet Union that Britain was still capable of fighting back. In August 1942, Churchill and his Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Sir Alan Brooke, traveled to Cairo and reshuffled the command. General Harold Alexander was appointed overall commander in the Middle East, and Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery was given command of the Eighth Army. Montgomery's arrival marked a turning point in Allied fortunes. Unlike some of his predecessors, Montgomery was confident, disciplined, and determined to restore morale. He emphasized rigorous training, strict planning, and above all, the need to fight only on favorable terms. "We will stand and fight here," he declared, making it clear there would be no more retreating. His leadership began to transform the weary Eighth Army into a force capable of taking the offensive. Meanwhile, Rommel's situation was deteriorating. Though he had captured vast territory, his supply lines stretched hundreds of miles across the desert.
The Royal Navy and Allied air power disrupted Axis shipping across the Mediterranean, starving Rommel of fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. Italy struggled to keep its forces supplied, and German High Command, focused on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union, could spare little for North Africa. By the autumn of 1942, the stage was set for the decisive showdown, the Second Battle of El Alamein. Both sides prepared for a confrontation that would determine not only the fate of Egypt, but also the entire course of the war in North Africa.
By October 1942, Montgomery was ready to strike. He had spent weeks preparing the Eighth Army for a major assault. Reinforcements had arrived, including fresh Commonwealth troops from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, and Britain itself. American-made Sherman tanks and plentiful supplies of ammunition and fuel gave the Allies a significant edge. Montgomery knew he could outlast Rommel if he fought a carefully orchestrated battle of attrition. Rommel, however, was not at full strength. Exhausted and suffering from illness, he briefly returned to Germany for treatment. During the crucial early stages of the battle, command of the Afrika Korps fell to General Georg Stumme, who lacked Rommel's flair. Worse, Axis supply shortages had reached a crisis point. Fuel, spare parts, and reinforcements were scarce. Still, Rommel's troops had dug extensive minefields, known as the Devil's Gardens, and fortified their defensive positions, confident they could blunt any Allied assault. On the night of October 23, 1942, the desert erupted. The battle began with one of the most massive artillery barrages of the war. Over 800 British and Commonwealth guns opened fire simultaneously, pounding Axis positions along a 40-mile front. The thunder rolled across the desert, shaking the morale of Axis soldiers and signaling that Montgomery's long-awaited offensive had begun. The infantry advanced under cover of darkness, aiming to punch holes through the minefields. Engineers or sappers risked their lives clearing mines by hand and creating narrow lanes for tanks to pass. Progress was slow and costly. The desert became a maze of barbed wire, artillery craters, and deadly traps. Axis machine gun nests and anti-tank guns took a heavy toll on advancing Allied units. In the days that followed, the fighting grew into a brutal stalemate. Montgomery launched probing attacks across the line, testing for weaknesses. Rommel, who rushed back from Germany after Stumme died suddenly of a heart attack early in the battle, tried to rally his men. He moved his armored reserves skillfully, counterattacking where he could, but the shortages of fuel and supplies limited his options. The Afrika Korps fought with determination, but it was increasingly clear that they were being ground down. Montgomery's strategy was deliberate. He resisted the temptation to gamble on a sudden breakthrough. Instead, he wore down the Axis defenses step by step, relying on superior numbers and supplies. Every day, the Allies inflicted heavy losses, while their own positions grew stronger. For the first time in the Desert War, the initiative was firmly in Allied hands. By early November 1942, the battle had raged for nearly 2 weeks. Both sides were exhausted, but the balance was shifting. The Allies had reserves of men, tanks, and fuel. The Axis had dwindling supplies and no hope of significant reinforcements. Montgomery recognized the moment to deliver the decisive blow. On November 2nd, he launched Operation Supercharge, a concentrated attack designed to finally rupture Rommel's defensive line. The operation began with another thunderous artillery barrage, followed by an armored thrust spearheaded by British and New Zealand divisions. The aim was to smash through the Axis positions north of the Qattara Depression, where Rommel had concentrated much of his defense. The fighting was ferocious. Axis anti-tank guns, including the deadly German 88mm cannons, cut down wave after wave of advancing Allied tanks. Yet the Eighth Army pressed forward relentlessly. The desert became a graveyard of burning vehicles and shattered equipment, but gradually the Allies gained ground. By November 3rd, cracks appeared in the Axis line. Rommel faced an impossible choice. His Afrika Korps had fought bravely, but they were bleeding white. With fuel almost gone and reserves exhausted, he informed Berlin that the front was collapsing. Adolf Hitler, however, sent a rigid order: stand fast, fight to the last soldier, and never retreat. Rommel, ever pragmatic, knew this was suicide. He had seen enough of war to understand when a battle was lost. Ignoring Hitler's order, he began to pull his forces back. The withdrawal quickly turned into a retreat. The Afrika Korps, along with battered Italian divisions, tried to escape westward into Libya. Allied forces pursued them across the desert, capturing prisoners and equipment along the way. What had once been Rommel's unstoppable advance now looked like a desperate flight. By November 4th, the outcome was clear. The Axis had been decisively defeated at El Alamein. The Allies had not only held their ground, but broken Rommel's army. The victory electrified Britain and the Commonwealth. Churchill, in a famous speech, declared, "Now this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." The Desert War had reached a turning point. For the first time, the Allies had achieved a major, undeniable victory against the Germans on land. The myth of Rommel's invincibility was shattered, and the tide of the North African campaign had begun to flow firmly in Allied favor. The victory at El Alamein had profound consequences for the course of World War II. Strategically, it ended the Axis threat to Egypt and the Suez Canal, a lifeline for Allied supplies and communication. Rommel's retreat allowed the Allies to seize the initiative in North Africa, launching a counteroffensive that would eventually drive Axis forces entirely out of Libya and later Tunisia. For the Allies, the triumph at El Alamein was more than a military success. It was a morale booster. British troops who had endured a series of defeats in the desert now had tangible proof that Axis forces could be defeated. The victory bolstered confidence across the Commonwealth and reassured the United States, which had recently entered the war, that Britain could still hold its own against Germany in key theaters. The battle also highlighted the critical importance of logistics, intelligence, and preparation. Montgomery's meticulous planning, combined with effective coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery, demonstrated that methodical, well-supported offensives could overcome even the most formidable opponents. The Axis, by contrast, suffered from overextended supply lines, dwindling fuel, and inadequate reinforcements, underscoring the limits of tactical brilliance in the absence of strategic support. El Alamein marked a turning point in the North African campaign. After this victory, the Allies moved steadily westward, retaking territory lost to Axis forces over the previous 2 years. By May 1943, the North African campaign was concluded with the surrender of nearly 250,000 German and Italian soldiers in Tunisia, securing North Africa entirely for the Allies. The battle also enhanced the reputations of its commanders. Montgomery emerged as a celebrated leader, respected for his patience, discipline, and ability to inspire his troops. Rommel, though defeated, retained his reputation as a brilliant tactician, admired even by his enemies for his daring maneuvers and leadership under pressure. Historically, El Alamein stands as a symbol of resilience and the turning of the tide in World War II. It demonstrated that even a retreating and beleaguered army could recover, reorganize, and deliver a decisive blow to an enemy once thought unstoppable. The lessons of El Alamein, careful planning, logistical foresight, and determination resonated throughout the remaining campaigns of the war, ultimately contributing to the Allied victory in Europe.